How to export a batch of mockup images in Photoshop. If you create custom mockup images in Photoshop using PSD files, mockup templates that contain smart objects, it's probably an incredibly boring and repetitive process for you, where maybe what you have to do is you come here, you step into the smart object, you find your artwork image, come over here, paste it in, position it, make sure it's good, and then you gotta save this. Oh, and we're fucked. Now we have to flatten this. Now I gotta come here, flatten the image, save. Jesus Christ, can I save this already? We're not done yet. I gotta go here, I gotta go File, Export, Quick Export as JPEG, and finally I can come here and save one measly image. Astronaut on skateboard. Cool, one mockup image created from all that work and effort. Or maybe you come here, perhaps you right click this, replace contents, find your next image, drop it inside of there, and then once again, come here, quick export, abstract, face, portraits. Cool, 2 mockup images from all that work and efforts. Now, if you're doing this for just a couple of mockup images, no big deal, you might say. I can just come in here and do this manually. But let's say you have a large number of images, maybe you have dozens of artwork pieces where you're trying to create mockups for them, and maybe instead of just one mockup template, maybe you have, different variants. It could be different frame colors to showcase the artwork. You could have different rooms and scenes showcasing the artwork, whatever it might be. If you're creating hundreds of mockup images in Photoshop, doing this one by one individually for each one of your images is going to be an incredibly boring process that's probably going to take you several hours of work. And so what we're going to show you in this video is how to automate this process and export an entire batch of mockup images all at once, completely automated, saving you tons of time in Photoshop. We're going to do this using a Photoshop plugin called Batch Replace Smart Objects. You can download this from the official Adobe Exchange. There will be a link in the description and in the comments for this video here. So it's really simple to use. There's really 2 main options here. You can either select an individual Photoshop document to use, which would be, one particular mockup scene, or you can click this little arrow and you can select an entire folder of PSD files to use, which is useful if you have, lots of different mockups you're creating and, it's a sweaty, complicated workflow. For now, we're just going to keep it simple. We'll just start off with one single Photoshop document just to show you how to use this plugin, how to set up your operations, how to tweak the settings, and how to get this process fully automated. Photoshop document, we're going to come here. We'll just select this room mockup scene here. Input folder to use, that's going to be the folder of your artwork images. So we'll just come here. This is a folder that already has all of these beautiful images inside of it, so that's selected. There's a little checkbox here, stretch images to fit smart objects. Now this is useful if the images inside of your input folder vary in size, vary in aspect ratio, vary in DPIs. If you know there's going to be some variance or the potential for any sort of difference in the images, it's recommended you just keep this safe so that it basically gets all of your images to perfectly fit the smart object, perfectly fit the mockup scene, and it'll just create perfect looking mockups every single time. Now I happen to know that all of these images are the exact same size, aspect ratio, and everything. So for this first operation, I'm going to leave it unchecked because it does run faster. That's because there's no intermediate step of resizing the images to fit the smart object. Like I said, if there's any possibility whatsoever that your images are going to vary, just keep this checked. It's a good, safe, smart default setting. And finally, output folder to use. That's going to be where we want our final mockup images to get exported to. So I just have this folder here. It's just an empty folder with nothing inside of it for now. But that's going to change here shortly. You can save your final mockup images in either JPEG or PNG file type. You can also customize the save quality here. If you want the highest quality images, you can go towards the higher end, and if you want the lower quality images, you can go down here. There's a trade-off here because, you can have fantastic high quality images, but the file size is going to be massive. Now, conversely, you can go way down here. Cool, you'll have a low file size, super lightweight files, the images are going to load fast, and they might look like dog shit. Best recommendation is just play around with this and find out what works best for your particular needs and workflows, and just find a setting that works for you. That's really it. The operation's set up. We're just going to click run this now, and it's just going to create the mockups for us. So in the background here, it's just cranking these out really fast. I mean, this thing's just fast as shit. What it's doing is for each one of the images inside of the input folder, it's basically replacing the smart object contents and then exporting the, man, it's already done with 75 images. I mean, that was fast as fuck. I mean, my computer's fast, but goddamn, that was fast. I couldn't even get done explaining what it's doing before it cranked all these out for us, so that's fantastic. Anyway, like I was saying, basically the way it works is for each one of the images inside of your input folder, it'll replace the contents of the smart object, and then it'll export the final updated mockup scene to your specified output folder using the save quality settings that you've set up here. Now, I will point out a couple quick things. Number one, my computer is fast fast as shit. Number two, this is also a really lightweight file here. Now, what I've done, as you can see, is I've really simplified the mockup scene, because a lot of mockup templates that you'll get, they're these sweaty, enormous files with all these complicated layers, and it's like, 200 megabytes. This thing is really slimmed down. It's super lightweight. It's down to 3 megabytes, which is a pretty lightweight file. I also resized it to the target size of the final images, because again, initially it was like, 8,000 by 8,000 pixels or something enormous. I point that out to say, don't necessarily expect all of your operations to run that fast. It's going to vary depending on your computer, the images, if you're stretching the images and so forth. But the bottom line is the plugin gets the job done quite effectively. So we're going to switch to the other mode now. What we're going to do here is you can actually select an entire folder of PSD files to use. Now, this is where the time savings of automating this process can really be taken to the next level, because what we did there is we just used one mockup scene. But what if you have all these different room mockups and you're trying to create different variants and so forth? Going through individually doing that one by one would take forever. Instead of doing that, do I want to spend 6 hours making mockup images one at a time, or do I want to click a few buttons? Man, what a tough decision. So we're going to come here, folder of PSD files to use, and we're just going to select our entire folder. So inside of here, I have 4 different product variants. So this is a plain canvas, and these are the 3 different framed canvas colors. And then just 5 different room mockups, just showing the artwork in different rooms and environments and stuff to give people a flavor of what it'll look like in their elegant looking homes. Folder of PSD files, that's selected. Now, when the operation runs in this mode, what it'll basically do is it'll start with mockup number 1, and for each image in the input folder, once again, it'll go through, it'll export the entire batch of mockup images. Then once it's done with PSD file number 1, cool, it'll move on to PSD file number 2 for each image in the input folder. Once again, it'll create the mockups, it'll export them to the output folder. Cool, I'll move on to number 3, 4, and so forth. This really allows you to just take the time saving to the absolute maximum. So we're going to come here, I'm going to select this other folder here because it has slightly fewer images, so that we can just kind of run this a little faster with all these different mockups, so we don't have to twiddle our thumbs and wait. Output folder to use, we're going to go final mockup images here. And just for shits and giggles, I'm going to throw a couple additional images inside of this folder that aren't sized correctly, just so we can use the resize functionality, and we can just show you how that one works. So I have a couple images in here that are different aspect ratios, some 4:5s, some 3:4s. We're just going to toss these bad boys in here, just so you can see how the resize functionality works, because all of these are 2:3 images. This is obviously a 2:3 aspect ratio smart object, but with this handy checkbox selected, what the plugin's going to do is it's going to automatically stretch all of our images to perfectly fit the mockup scene. So this is all set up and ready to rock and roll. I hope you are as excited as I am, because we're about to run this bitch. We're going to click this button, and as you can see, there's a little intermediate step. When the checkbox was not selected, it just blazed through it super fast. When you have this option selected, it does take longer to run the operation, because what's happening is there's a little intermediate step where it opens up the image, it gets the smart objects, dimensions and everything, and it does take a little bit longer to process them, but it's a small price to pay for perfect looking mockup images. This operation is completely finished. Well, 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 would you look at that? We're gonna go ahead and pop over here and take a look at our images, and as you can see, it just cranked out all the mockups. Now, the cool thing about the way this plugin works is, as you can see, it groups the images by artwork file name, just by the way the file naming conventions work. So this is really convenient for if you need to take all of these images, pass them on to the next step in the workflow, drop them in an email to a client, upload them to your e-commerce store, on the product page, whatever it is. So this is really handy because it just groups it all together like this. And the astute observer may have noticed a couple things. Number one, while this was running, it does go a little bit slower because there's that intermediate step of resizing the images to fit the smart object, but that is a small price to pay to have perfect looking mockup images. As you can see, even though the original images did not perfectly fit the mockup scene, the plugin performed a little handy resize to make it look perfectly, because if you were to come in and manually try to do this, if I just came here and I said replace contents, let's take this one, plop this in here. That looks like dog shit. It doesn't fit right. And so with this checkbox enabled, you know, it just makes mockup images that fit the scene and look fantastic. Something else you might have noticed is as the operation was running, it was closing out the mockup files after it finished with it. Now, this is a pretty handy feature for, let's say you have a workflow where instead of creating 10 different PSD mockup files, you know, what if you have like 40 or 100 inside of here? If you're just opening up 40 or 50 different PSD files in Photoshop, it's just going to drag your performance down. It might even crash your Photoshop depending on the size of the files. So one nifty feature is if you have multiple step operations where you're iterating through different PSD files or whatever it is, it'll just automatically close out the PSD file after it finishes with it. It'll leave the last one open just so you can sort of pick up where you left off and stuff, but that's something performance-wise that keeps Photoshop running fast, prevents it from, you know, opening 50 different files or whatever. It's just one of those handy little things about this plugin. So that's running the operations in real time. There's also the option to save individual operations, and you can also set up multiple step operations if you have more complicated workflows, or if you're just trying to automate your entire mockup creation workflow. And instead of coming in here and setting this up each time, if you know that it's always going to be the same files you're using, it's always the same input folder where you store your images, it's always the same folder where you want to export the final mockup images to. There's really no need to come in here and set this up anew each time and potentially make a mistake and, oh fuck, I gotta come back and redo it. If it's always the same standardized workflow, you can just sort of set up your operation, come here, make my canvas mockups, save, and then cool, you can just come here, click this, run batch, and it'll just run the operation using all of your specified settings. So that's the saving individual operations side of this. That's pretty straightforward. Basically, you just come here, type a name, and whatever your operation settings are in this top section, you click the save button, and it'll just save your specified operation. So it knows what operation mode you're in, it knows what folder of PSD files to use, it knows what your input folder is, it knows your settings, blah, 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 all that fun stuff. Something else you can do is you can actually save multiple step workflows. This is a little more complicated, so we'll go through it, but really the best way to think of it is you're just chaining together individual saved operations to where each operation has its own step, and you can run the entire multi-step sequence one after the other, completely automated, 100% on autopilot. This is super useful if you have a complicated workflow. Maybe you have different templates that you use for different parts of your business. Maybe you're a freelancer, you have different clients you're creating mockups for. Whatever it happens to be, this is really useful for just pushing the time savings and automation to the maximum, because you can just come here, give it a name, make all of my mockups. Exclamation point. Save, that's the name of our workflow. So we're going to come here, we'll just show you a little example. We'll just come here, folder of PSD files, Roam mockup 1, that'll be the name we eventually give it. Input folder to use, we're going to come and just select our artwork images folder. We'll come here, select our output folder, and we'll set up our settings like so. Boom, step 1, that's going to be the first step. Now we're going to come here for step number 2. Let's say that's for client number 1. Let's say client number 2, I'm creating a different mockup. Clients 2 mockups, whatever it is. Maybe he's using a different input folder. Perhaps there's a different output folder. You get the idea. Add, it'll save step number 2. And you can really just set up however many steps you need. You can even switch between different modes. So maybe step 1, you just need to create one particular mockup scene, but maybe step 2, you have to use an entire folder. Whatever it is, this feature is really flexible, and this allows you to just chain together as many automated operations as you need to where it'll just export the batch of mockup images one after the other with one single button click. Now, something else that we need to talk about is setting up your mockup templates so that it's compatible with this plugin. If it's a simple scene like this, where, you know, I've simplified it down to just the basics, as long as there's just one single smart object, the plugin is smart and it knows, cool, there's one smart object inside of this mockup scene. The plugin is called batch replace smart object, so it'll just locate the smart object and it'll use that to perform the operation. What if we have a more complicated mockup scene where instead of one smart object, there are 2 or perhaps even more smart objects in the scene? What are we going to do in that case? Really, it's pretty straightforward. All you need to do is select your target smart object layer, and if there are multiple smart objects in the scene, the plugin will simply operate on whatever smart objects happen to be selected. This does also mean that if you select several smart objects in the scene, then instead of just replacing one, the plugin, whatever image it's on from the input folder, it'll replace both smart objects, and then it'll export the mockup image. Really though, a lot of mockup templates that you'll download online, they'll be these incredibly sweaty files. Some of them have like a half dozen smart objects or more. All you need to do is locate just the one smart object that you need to use to perform the replacement operation, and just make sure that's selected before you set up and run the operation. Quick tip, if you're going to be saving operations to run later, you'll want to make sure that the target smart object layer is selected before you save the documents, because merely selecting a different layer, Photoshop doesn't detect that as like a significant enough event to be worth saving. So if all I do is select a different layer and save this, I try to go Control S, it doesn't actually do anything. Come here, open it up, so you'd be like, hey, what the fuck, it's using the wrong smart object layer. So really, if you're going to be running saved operations or multiple step workflows, just one bonus tip to avoid any frustrations where it operates on the wrong layer, just make sure, let's say we want to select this, then you can just make some superficial change, like change the name of a layer. Then you can come here, save this, close it out, open it up, and would you look at that, it's now selected the correct layer. Anyway, it's a super useful plugin. It's called Batch Replace Smart Objects. Once again, you can find a link in the description or the comments. Add this to Photoshop, start automating this process, and you can save tons of time on this boring, repetitive workflow task in Photoshop. Hope you found this helpful. Make sure to drop a like and comment for some of that YouTube algorithmic engagement action that'll help push the video to more people. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and see you later.